There is a secret that the oldest families of the Hebrew tradition have guarded for centuries. You won't find it in any modern finance book. It isn't taught in your local synagogue. It doesn't show up in trendy manifestation courses, and you won't find it scrolling through typical self-help videos. It is a secret passed down from father to son, from master to disciple, whispered in closed rooms, far away from the prying eyes of the world. And it is so profoundly simple that when you first hear it, you're going to think it's absolutely crazy. You take the exact amount of money you need, you write it completely backward, from right to left, the exact way Hebrew is written, and you store it in a very specific place. That's it. But what lies behind that simple act, the law it activates, and the invisible mechanism it sets into motion, is something so immensely powerful that the people who practice it swear reality literally reorganizes itself around that piece of paper, just like iron filings reorganize around a magnet. But before I explain to you exactly why it works, you need to hear the story of a man who was on the very brink of losing everything before he stumbled upon this secret. Because without the secret is just a trick. With the story, it becomes a key. In the freezing winter of 2009, in a quiet suburb just outside of Chicago, Illinois, a 51-year-old man named Gerald Vance sat alone in his living room at 2 o'clock in the morning. He was staring at a piece of paper that was visibly trembling in his hands. It was a formal notification from his bank. It stated coldly that he had exactly 90 days to liquidate the massive backlog on his mortgage, or the foreclosure process would begin. 90 days. 3 months. To scrape together an amount of money that Gerald couldn't have raised even if he worked every single hour of an entire year. That house was everything he had. It was a modest 2-story colonial home with faded blue siding, a small front yard that his wife, Teresa, tended to with religious devotion, and a driveway where their car used to sit. Sold 6 months prior just to keep up with mounting debts. It held the bedrooms of his 2 daughters, rooms filled with posters, memories, and the echoes of a lifetime. Gerald had bought that home 12 years earlier with a conventional mortgage that, at the time, seemed completely manageable. But the 2008 Great Recession hit him just like it hit millions of hard-working Americans. Interest rates fluctuated wildly. His debt multiplied like a living organism, and what began as a reasonable monthly payment turned into a predatory figure that swallowed more than Gerald could ever hope to earn. Gerald was a certified accountant. He ran a small, independent practice that he shared with a colleague in a modest brick building downtown. It was a simple room with 2 desks, 2 older desktop computers with loud, industrial-sounding cooling fans, a gray metal filing cabinet, and a telephone that was ringing less and less every single day. The economic crash had devastated his clients, too. Local businesses were shutting down, companies were slashing expenses, and the very first thing they cut was their external accountant. In less than 3 years, Gerald had lost more than half of his client base. The few clients who remained paid late, and some stopped paying altogether. Teresa took a part-time job at a local stationery and print shop. The pay was low, but it was steady. It became the family's only reliable income. It paid for the groceries, the heating bill, the electricity, and their daughter's school supplies. But for the mortgage, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The debt ballooned every month with compound interest that felt as if it had been intentionally designed by someone who despised the working class. Gerald had tried everything. He renegotiated with the bank 3 times. Every modification promised relief, but only delivered deeper debt. He swallowed his pride and asked family members for help. A brother-in-law lent him a small sum that was gone within 3 months. His own brother told him he was flat out broke. An uncle told him he was drowning in his own financial troubles. Gerald had sold the family car to buy precious time. It paid off 3 overdue months, but by the 4th month he was right back in the exact same position, only now they were stranded without a vehicle. He tried desperately to acquire new clients. He left his house every morning with his worn leather briefcase and business cards printed at a cheap local shop. He walked into businesses, knocked on doors, and left his cards at reception desks, only for secretaries to throw them into the trash before he even reached the corner of the block. The market was completely saturated with desperate professionals offering rock-bottom prices. And Gerald, at 51, with an office that practically radiated financial defeat, was nobody's first choice. The absolute worst part was the night, when his daughters were asleep and Teresa pretended to be asleep. Gerald would sit at the table with his calculator and stack of bank statements. He added, he subtracted, he searched for impossible combinations of numbers that would somehow allow them to make it to the end of the month. But the numbers didn't lie, and what they said was simple and brutal. It's not enough. It's never going to be enough. There is absolutely no way. One bitter night in February, after another agonizing session with the calculator, Gerald just sat there in the pitch-black darkness of his living room. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't move. He just sat there under the crushing weight of a home that was slipping away, a family that depended entirely on him, and a reputation that was crumbling into dust. And for the first time in his life, he thought something he had never dared to voice to a single soul. Maybe they would just be better off if I disappeared. He didn't know where he would go or how. He just felt that his very presence was an anchor pulling down everyone he loved. Teresa found him there at 4 in the morning, sitting motionless in the dark. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. She simply sat down right next to him, took his cold hand in hers, and they stayed like that in total silence. 2 people holding hands in the dark, inside a house that was about to stop being theirs. Before we find out what happened next, I want to pause for just a moment. I know that here on YouTube, almost everyone watches without subscribing, and sometimes we just forget to hit that button. But if you are listening to my voice right now, and you've already subscribed and liked this video, I want to thank you from the absolute bottom of my heart. It takes me an incredible amount of time to research these deep accounts, write them with care, and produce them for you. Your support means more than you can ever imagine. Thank you. Now, let's get right back to the story, because what happened next will completely change the way you view reality. It was Teresa who changed everything, not with a sudden financial strategy and not with a secret loan, but with a single visit. Teresa had a childhood friend named Miriam. Miriam's family had immigrated to the United States from Aleppo, Syria 3 generations ago, settling into a traditional, vibrant neighborhood in Chicago. They owned a historic fabric and textile shop downtown, much like many traditional families in that district. Miriam and Teresa had known each other since elementary school. Although they had drifted apart over the years as life got busy, the deep affection between them had never faded. Teresa called her on a Tuesday morning. She poured her heart out, the foreclosure notice, the 90-day countdown, Gerald's terrifying despair. She broke down in tears. Miriam listened intently, never once interrupting. When Teresa finally finished, Miriam spoke softly. "Tell Gerald to come to our shop tomorrow evening at exactly 7 o'clock. My father wants to speak with him." Miriam's father was named Reb Isaac. He was 78 years old. He was a small man with a slightly hunched back, a black velvet kippah permanently resting on his head, and deep dark eyes that looked as though they had witnessed absolutely everything a human being could possibly experience in a lifetime. He had run that fabric store for over 40 years. He had survived deep economic recessions, market crashes, fires, and the heartbreaking loss of his wife. Yet there he was, sitting calmly behind the heavy wooden counter, measuring fabric with an old brass yardstick, possessing a profound serenity that didn't seem to belong to this frantic modern world. Gerald arrived at the shop at exactly 7 o'clock. The air inside smelled of rich textiles, faint dust, and that indefinable aroma of places where time moves intentionally slower. Reb Isaac was entirely alone. Miriam had already left. The main lights were dimmed, and only a classic green banker's lamp illuminated the counter. Reb Isaac watched him walk in. He didn't get up, but he pointed gently to a wooden chair. Gerald sat down. Without asking, Reb Isaac poured him a warm glass of tea in a thick glass tumbler. Then he spoke. "Miriam told me about your house. How much do you owe?" Gerald told him the exact crushing figure. Reb Isaac didn't flinch. There was no look of shock nor any superficial pity. He merely nodded as if receiving just another ordinary data point in a long conversation. "Do you know why you are here, Gerald? You are here because Teresa called Miriam. But deeper than that, you are here because everything you could humanly do has officially run out. And it is precisely when what you can do is completely exhausted that what can be done by something vastly greater than you finally begins." Gerald didn't quite understand. Reb Isaac reached into a deep drawer beneath the counter. He pulled out an old, heavy, hardcover ledger with faded Hebrew lettering embossed on the front. He opened it to a page marked by a single golden thread. He spun the ledger around so Gerald could see it. There were columns of handwritten numbers, but something was incredibly strange about them. The numbers were written entirely backward, from right to left. "Do you see these numbers?" Reb Isaac murmured. "These are the exact financial sums my father desperately needed during the most agonizing moments of his life. When he arrived in America with absolutely nothing. When he lost his very first storefront to a devastating fire. When the crash of 1929 tore this country apart. Every single time he needed a highly specific amount, he wrote it down right here. But he never wrote it the way you write. He wrote it backward." "Backward?" Gerald asked, bewildered. Why? Reb Isaac closed the ledger and locked eyes with him. In the Hebrew language, everything is written from right to left, not just the letters, but the sacred numbers as well. And there is a profound energetic reason for this that goes far beyond mere cultural custom. In our deepest tradition, the right side represents Chesed, which is loving kindness, mercy, absolute generosity, and the boundless flow of abundance. It is like rain descending from the heavens without anyone having to beg for it. The left side represents Gevurah, which signifies restriction, judgment, boundaries, and the forces that contain and give shape. Both forces are absolutely necessary. Without Chesed, there is no flow. Without Gevurah, there is no vessel to hold it. But the direction in which you activate them alters your reality completely. Reb Isaac took a pen from the counter and drew an arrow on a scrap of brown wrapping paper, tracing it from left to right. When you write a number normally from left to right, just as the entire Western world does, you are subconsciously writing from restriction toward the flow. You are beginning in Gevurah, in the limitation, the lack, the desperate need, and you are trying to push your way toward abundance. But you never truly arrive because the energy you are generating is rooted in chasing, in frantic effort, in swimming violently against the current. It is like trying to fill a cup by holding it completely upside down in a rainstorm. The rain is falling heavily all around it, but the cup cannot receive a single drop because it is oriented in the wrong direction. Gerald listened, completely motionless. Reb Isaac then drew another arrow, this time from right to left. But when you write the number backward from right to left, you are instantly inverting the energetic direction. You are beginning your focus in Chesed, in the mercy, the open flow, the infinite source. And you are drawing it down toward concrete physical manifestation into this world, directly into your hands. You are declaring to the universe, abundance already exists. It is already flowing. I am simply drawing the exact blueprint for it to land in my life. It is not begging. It is not pleading. It is a sovereign declaration. It is writing reality in the exact direction that reality naturally moves. From the spiritual to the physical, from the invisible to the visible, from the Shefa, the divine abundance, straight into your wallet. But it's just writing a number backward, Gerald muttered, his analytical mind resisting. How can a simple act like that change anything? Reb Isaac smiled. It was a wise, weathered smile, filled with a deep certainty that Gerald couldn't name. Have you ever heard of the Coach Hadibber? The power of the word, the power of expression. Every letter, every number, every single stroke you make with absolute intention is a literal act of creation. It isn't magic, it is spiritual physics. When you write the amount you need backward, you are doing three powerful things simultaneously. He raised one finger. First, you are aligning with the natural direction of the divine flow, bringing it from the source down to your hands. He raised a second finger. Second, you are locking in a precise intention. It isn't a vague, desperate wish to have more money. It is an exact, specific number. The universe never responds to vagueness. It responds to absolute precision. When you know down to the single dollar what is required, and you map it out with intent, you are issuing a clear command. He raised a third finger. And third, you are completely shattering your mental control. Writing something backward forces your brain to think entirely differently. It yanks you out of your autopilot routine, breaks the psychological pattern that has kept you trapped in panic. And the moment you break that rigid mental loop, you finally create an open space for something entirely new to enter. Reb Isaac pulled a clean sheet of white paper and a black ink pen from his drawer, sliding them across the wooden counter to Gerald. Write down the exact amount you need to save your home, not a penny less. But write it completely backward. If you need $150,000, you write 000051 from right to left, the way truth is written. Gerald picked up the pen. His hand was visibly shaking. He began to write the numbers backward. It felt clumsy. It required deep, intense concentration to force his mind to construct each digit in reverse. And during that exact effort of thinking backward, something shifted in his mind. Something incredibly subtle, but undeniably real. The number stopped feeling like a financial death sentence. It stopped being the terrifying monster that woke him up in a cold sweat at 2 in the morning. It transformed into a seed, a declaration, a line of ink moving in the correct direction. Now, Reb Isaac instructed, right beneath that number, write these words exactly. I am an open channel for the Shefa. This amount is already on its way to me. I receive it with immense gratitude and without fear. Gerald wrote it down. His hand had stopped shaking. Fold the paper 3 times toward yourself, Reb Isaac said. Always toward yourself, because you are pulling the energy in, not pushing it away. Keep it inside your wallet, right next to whatever physical cash you have, even if it's just a single dollar bill. The seed must always rest near the soil where it is meant to germinate. Gerald carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his wallet next to a crumpled $20 bill, the only cash he had left to his name. Every single morning, Reb Isaac concluded, before you step foot outside your house, pull out your wallet, look at the paper, read the number backward from right to left, and recite those words. Do it without rushing, without shouting, and without desperation. Speak with the absolute calm of someone who knows it is already done. Because it is already done, Gerald. The very moment you mapped that number in the proper direction, something shifted. Something you cannot see with your eyes is already at work. For how long do I do this? Gerald asked. Until it arrives. Do not give the universe a frantic deadline. Do not impose limitations. Let the Shefa find its path. Your only job is to avoid blocking it. And there is only one thing that blocks it: doubt. Every time you slip into doubt, every time you tell yourself this won't work, you are actively building a wall between yourself and the flow. So when the doubt comes, and it will come, simply pull out your wallet, look at the paper, read the words, and keep moving. Gerald walked out of the fabric shop at 9 o'clock that night. The streets of downtown were quiet, the vintage street lamps casting long shadows against the brick facades. He walked toward the train station with his wallet nestled in his pocket, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and intensely alive. Ridiculous because a backward number on a scrap of paper shouldn't have the power to alter his reality. Alive because deep within his chest, something that had been completely dead for months had just given a sharp, clear heartbeat. That night he told Teresa everything. She listened with that beautiful, unwavering attention she gave to everything he said, without judgment, without interrupting, without needing to fully comprehend the mechanics in order to give her total support. When he finished, she smiled softly and said, "I believe in Reb Isaac. I have seen his family rebuild their lives from absolute nothingness more than once. They understand something about this world that we don't." The next morning, Gerald stood in the kitchen, pulled out his wallet, unfolded the paper, and read the digits backward. He murmured the words, "I am an open channel for the Shefa. This amount is already on its way to me. I receive it with immense gratitude and without fear." The words felt timid at first, like a faint whisper in an empty room, but he spoke them nonetheless. For the first few days, absolutely nothing visible happened. Gerald kept going to his office, kept making cold calls, kept searching for clients, but there was a profound shift in how he searched. He was no longer operating from sheer panicked desperation. He was moving with a newfound, unexplainable calmness, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his chest while he slept. On the fourth day, however, the doubt roared back with a vengeance, exactly as Reb Isaac had warned. Gerald was sitting alone in his office, staring at a completely silent telephone, when that cynical inner voice started jeering, "This is utterly pathetic. You have a backward number tucked into your wallet, and you honestly think that's going to pay off a commercial bank mortgage? You're an accountant, for God's sake. You work with cold, hard math. You know numbers aren't solved by folded pieces of paper. They're solved by revenue, and you don't have revenue. You're going to lose the house, and you'll be the failure who lost his family's home because you trusted an old man who sells fabric." The voice was incredibly convincing. It had logic on its side. It had the bank statements on its side, and it had months of brutal failure to back it up. Gerald felt his chest tighten up all over again. He stood up from his desk, walked down the hall to the restroom, and splashed freezing water onto his face. He stared at himself in the mirror, and then, as an absolute act of pure rebellion against his own mind, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and unfolded the paper. He stared at the backward numbers and whispered the words directly into the mirror over the sound of a dripping faucet. "I am an open channel for the Shefa. This amount is already on its way to me." The cynical voice didn't vanish instantly, but its volume dropped significantly. It quieted down just enough for him to breathe, just enough for him to walk back to his desk and keep working. Teresa supported him without him ever having to ask. Every morning when Gerald pulled out his wallet in the kitchen, she was simply there. She didn't say a word, and she didn't actively participate in the ritual, but she anchored the room with her silent presence. One morning, as he was reading the words, she simply placed her hand gently on his shoulder. She didn't say anything, just her hand on his shoulder, and Gerald felt that that silent gesture carried more weight than every terrifying figure on his calculator. By the end of that first week, an old client who had owed him a substantial fee for over 8 months, suddenly called out of the blue. "Hey, Gerald, I am so incredibly sorry for the massive delay. I ran into a brutal cash flow crunch, but things finally cleared up today. I just wired over the full amount I owed you." It wasn't enough to save the house, but it was the first real movement, the very first domino to fall. Gerald hung up the phone and just stared at the receiver. He didn't scream. He didn't celebrate. He just thought, something is moving. In the second week, a close acquaintance of Teresa, who ran a rapidly growing boutique bakery corporate catering service, reached out to Gerald. "My previous accountant abruptly relocated out of state, and I desperately need someone I can completely trust. Teresa mentioned you were exceptional with corporate tax structures." It wasn't a massive corporate account, but it was steady, guaranteed monthly recurring revenue, and it had dropped right into his lap, without him ever chasing it, without knocking on a door, without leaving a card. It just materialized, as if an invisible hand were rearranging the pieces of his schedule. During the third week, something far larger occurred. A prominent local businessman, someone to whom Gerald had left a business card 2 months prior at a corporate reception, a card he was certain had been thrown straight into the trash, called his line. "Is this Gerald Vance? Your business card has been sitting right on the corner of my desk for 2 months, and for some reason it caught my eye this morning. I was told you're an incredibly thorough accountant with deep crisis management experience. I'm facing a highly complex federal tax audit, and I need expert intervention immediately." It was a medium-sized manufacturing company with 3 regional distribution centers. They needed an entire overhaul of their financial books before the auditors arrived. The project paid exceptionally well, extraordinarily well, and it required the exact hyper-specific expertise that Gerald had spent 25 years accumulating. That card had sat completely untouched on that desk for 2 full months. No one looked at it, no one moved it. And right now, precisely when Gerald needed it most, the businessman saw it. A pure coincidence? The logical mind would claim. A bridge of incidents, as Neville Goddard would call it. The Shefa finding its perfect path, as Reb Isaac would say. Now that you see how things began to shift, let me ask you a sincere question. Have you ever desperately needed an exact amount of money and felt that it was statistically impossible, that the math simply didn't add up? I would absolutely love to read your personal experience in the comments below. And if this story is reminding you right now that there are spiritual ways to move what appears completely unmovable in your life, take a second to share it with someone. Sometimes a story lands exactly when someone else desperately needs to hear it. The income began to flow, not in a single chaotic lottery win, but piece by piece, client by client, like a river that gradually clears its path after a devastating drought. Every morning, Gerald pulled out his wallet, read the reverse digits, said the declaration, and every single week something new materialized. A high-value referral, an unexpected phone call, an old debt collected, a lucrative consulting gig appearing out of thin air. By May, just 2 months after that fateful night in the quiet fabric store, Gerald had successfully accumulated over half of the entire foreclosure balance, not through a stroke of blind luck, but through a beautifully orchestrated accumulation of small financial streams converging from directions he could have never planned himself, like mountain streams flowing down different slopes to meet in the exact same riverbed. By July, with the 90-day bank ultimatum nearly at its absolute end, Gerald walked directly into the bank. He wore his finest tailored shirt, his trousers perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He didn't do it out of vanity. He did it out of sheer dignity, because the last time he had stepped into that building, he was dragging his feet with his head hung low, practically begging for a temporary extension. This time he walked in entirely differently, erect, firm, with a secure envelope held tightly in his hand and a profound, priceless calmness radiating through his entire body. He possessed the complete balance, not just a rough estimate, but the exact amount down to the single penny, and then some. Money that had arrived from dimensions he could never have engineered on a spreadsheet. He sat down across from the bank executive. It wasn't the same cold representative from before. It was a younger man in a sharp suit with a rehearsed corporate smile. Gerald placed the envelope calmly onto the desk. The executive opened it, counted the funds, verified the account on his monitor, and looked up with that distinct mixture of shock and rigid professionalism that bank employees get when reality doesn't match the bleak history on their screens. "Where exactly did these funds come from, Mr. Vance?" Gerald looked at him with absolute serenity. Hard work. And it was the absolute truth. Except it wasn't the superficial kind of work the executive could ever comprehend. It was the deep spiritual work of opening an energetic channel, of reversing a lifelong direction, of writing a number completely backward and believing, against all human logic, against all material evidence, against every panicked inner voice that screamed impossible, that what was on its way would inevitably arrive. The executive processed the payment, printed out a formal receipt, and handed it over. Gerald took it, looked at the ink, and on that simple piece of paper, printed by a banking machine in downtown Chicago, he saw vastly more than a mere financial transaction. He saw undeniable proof that the invisible world works. That direction matters, that words create, that an old man sitting behind a dim counter in a fabric shop knew something that no bank executive, no Wall Street economist, and no financial analyst on earth would ever understand. That evening, Gerald arrived home and placed the official mortgage liquidation receipt squarely on the dining room table. Teresa looked at it. His daughters looked at it. The entire house fell into a deep, sacred silence. That very particular kind of silence that blankets a room when something monumental has just occurred, and no one quite knows how to process the relief. Then his youngest daughter, the 14-year-old who had spent months listening to her parents whispering in absolute panic about the bank, the house, and the shrinking numbers, asked in a fragile voice, They're not going to take our home any more?" Gerald looked at her, his eyes welling with tears. "No, sweetheart, not any more." His daughter flew into his arms, wrapping her arms around his neck. His oldest daughter joined in instantly. Teresa walked over, wrapping her arms around all of them, and the four of them stood there, locked in a tight embrace in the middle of their kitchen, inside a home that was completely, undeniably theirs. A week later, Gerald walked back into the fabric shop. Reb Isaac was in his exact usual spot behind the counter, carefully measuring a cut of premium cotton linen for a customer. Gerald waited in total silence, looking at the towering rolls of cloth, breathing in that familiar scent of cotton and stillness that he would now permanently associate with the night his entire life changed its course. When the customer finally left, Gerald stepped up to the counter. He pulled out his wallet, extracted the paper folded 3 times, and laid it flat before Reb Isaac. "It was fulfilled," Gerald said softly. Reb Isaac picked up the paper, unfolding it with slow, deliberate fingers. He gazed at the digits written from right to left, read the declaration in total silence, and closed his eyes for a brief, reverent moment. When he opened them, he looked deeply at Gerald. "It was not fulfilled, Gerald. It was manifested. The distinction is profoundly important. Fulfillment is when an external force decides to grant you a favor. Manifestation is when your internal alignment literally creates the physical reality. You did not get lucky. You constructed a pathway. That sum of money was always on its way to you. You simply opened the door by writing it in the proper direction." Gerald nodded. He didn't need any further explanation. He had lived it. He had felt it every single morning in front of his wallet, in every single mountain of doubt he had consciously climbed over, in every single high-paying client that had manifested without him ever seeking them out. He had experienced it in his very bones, and that experience was worth more than 1,000 intellectual explanations. Then Reb Isaac did something extraordinary. He opened his father's ancient ledger, the one containing generations of numbers written backward. On the very next clean, empty line, he dipped a fountain pen into black ink and carefully wrote down Gerald's exact amount, backward in stark black ink. "Now your number rests alongside the numbers of my family," Reb Isaac whispered, "because this wisdom does not belong to me. It belongs to every single soul who needs it, and you are now officially a link in this eternal chain." What Reb Isaac passed down to Gerald that night in a quiet corner of Chicago, what his father had guarded inside a weathered notebook of reverse numbers, is an ancient truth that connects directly to the deepest energetic laws of the universe. The direction of writing is never an arbitrary cultural whim. It is an absolute blueprint of energy. To focus from right to left, from Chesed to Gevurah, from infinite mercy to physical form, is to align your human intent with the natural flow of divine abundance. It means you completely stop swimming frantically against the current, and you finally allow the current to carry you. When you write the amount you need backward, you are executing something that no financial planner on earth can teach you. You are fundamentally altering your psychological and spiritual relationship with money. You stop chasing it. You stop begging for it out of a state of lack. You declare it. You write it. You anchor it. And then you trust. You trust with the absolute, unshakable peace of a farmer who has planted a premium seed in fertile soil, knowing with total certainty that the sun and the rain will do their job. Tonight, do something extraordinary for yourself. Take a clean piece of white paper and a pen. Sit down in total, uninterrupted silence. Write down the exact amount of money you need right now. Not a vague, lazy wish for wealth. Not a generalization like enough to live well. An exact, precise number down to the dollar. Precision is the ultimate key. And then, right beneath it, write that exact same number completely backward, from right to left, slowly, digit by digit. Notice exactly what happens to your mind while you do it. Your brain will be forced to concentrate in a completely unfamiliar way. It will violently yank you out of your daily autopilot routine. And in that deliberate effort of thinking backward, a profound shift occurs. The old pattern breaks. The direction of lack is reversed. The momentum of years spent writing your life from restriction toward abundance and never getting there is completely undone. Right underneath, write this declaration. I am an open channel for the Shefa. This amount is already on its way to me. I receive it with immense gratitude and without fear. Fold the paper 3 times toward yourself. Place it securely in your wallet next to your physical money. And every single morning before you start your day, pull it out. Look at the backward digits. Recite those words intentionally and go about your day. Do not attach a frantic deadline. Do not impose rigid conditions. Stop trying to micromanage exactly how it will arrive. Simply trust. And every single time the doubt creeps in, and it will creep in, pull out your wallet, anchor your eyes on that paper, read the words, and take a deep breath. Because the abundance you need already exists. It is already out there in the world, in someone's hands, in a transaction, in an agreement that has already been spiritually signed. Your job is not to manufacture it out of nothing. Your job is simply to clear the highway so it can drive straight to you. And that highway opens with a number, a direction, and an absolute declaration of faith. From right to left, from the heavens to the earth, from the infinite flow straight into your hands. Write it down tonight and watch exactly how reality beautifully reorganizes itself around a simple folded piece of paper inside your wallet.